Have you ever wondered how a mafia boss gets his minions to work for him? When we take away our prejudices, we find successful mobsters and top business leaders have a lot in common: that they have the power to influence. They're very good at using psychological techniques to bring in associates and even isolate their enemies. This technique of domination can always turn a situation around. They are in control of the situation. If you want to be a good leader at work too, the dark psychology of domination. Maybe I can give you a different perspective. Hello, I'm Dave. Welcome to the Dark Psychology channel. In this episode, I'm going to share 5 of the most commonly used dark psychology techniques. These are the most common techniques used by both mafia bosses and big business owners. This is a channel to learn how to grow your mind, career tips, life tips, and interesting psychological facts. If you are interested in this kind of content, you are welcome to subscribe to this channel so you won't miss the next mind growth movie. Let's get started with this episode, and the first tips I'd like to share are: 1. Enter the executive's private sphere. The role effect. Although we always say the most important thing is to rely on yourself, but no matter in the workplace or gangsters, if you have a higher status than yourself as a backer, you will feel more confident in everything you do. With the support of a backer, we may also get more resources and promotion. We may get more resources and promotion opportunities than others. Although it may sound improper, but it's a common phenomenon in our society. We have to recognize this reality. So what should the average office worker do? How can the average office worker make their supervisor their backer? The most direct way. The most direct way is to get into your boss's personal life. For example, after a party. After a party, you can go to the supervisor's home to say hello. Make yourself close to the supervisor's family. We can also find out what interests we share with our supervisor, like tennis, biking, video games, etc. People are different when they are at work or at private events. People are different when they are at work or in their private activities. Psychology calls it the role effect. The more we see the other person in a different light, the more different we see the other person, the easier it is for us to recognize them as our own. And naturally, we give them more trust. Johnny Depp's movie, Donnie Brasco. It's based on a true story. He played the role of an undercover agent who infiltrated a gang in order to collect evidence of the gangsters' crimes. He became close to the boss's family until the gangster was arrested by the FBI. He still couldn't believe that Johnny Depp was an agent, so he wanted to make himself more valuable. Be proactive and learn the different faces of your supervisor. Make your backer your backer. 2. Turn enemies into partners. The Franklin Effect. Mobsters are good at making friends. Sometimes they can even make friends. Sometimes even to the point where they're like brothers to rival gangs. From a profit standpoint, they have more sensitive and difficult relationships. More sensitive and tricky. But they can always, to strike the right balance, they often use a psychological technique, is the Franklin Effect. When Franklin was just a state legislator, he wanted to win the approval and support of another congressman. Instead of groveling and making overtures, he took a unique approach. He heard that this congressman had a very rare book in his collection. So he wrote him a letter, and he asked politely, would you lend him the book for a few days? For a few days, so that he could read it? And the congressman sent the book over. Franklin returned it a week later with a note of thanks. And then, at the next meeting of the legislature, the congressman took it upon himself to talk to Franklin, and on many other matters. Franklin's approval on a number of things. Franklin said to his assistant. Franklin said to his aide, people who have helped you before will be more than willing to do you another favor. In other words, The best way to make people like you is not to help them, but to let them help you. This effect can be applied to the workplace as well. If you're at work, if you feel that the other person hates you, you should always ask for help. And make sure you don't ask for anything too complicated. It's like borrowing a book from Franklin. The more you do, the more effective you'll be. When the other person realizes that he or she, that they're responding in kind, the negative feelings will fade away. This simple technique can instantly improve the relationship between two people. One less enemy, one more friend. 3. Threats of accusations. Fantasy bias effect. We often see in the news that the gangsters are trying to collect debts, and even violent deaths. But in reality, the Yakuza do not only use violence against debtors. Violence is not the only way. When they find the borrower, they will first bring him to their office. Although it is said to be brought to the office, the Yakuza don't kidnap the borrower. They say politely, "I don't want to use violence against you. I just want to talk about what's going to happen. How can you pay off the loan within your means?" But when the borrower arrives at the office, the mob boss does a 180. He starts beating up his boys in front of the borrower. As the borrower watched, half a man's life was knocked down. The borrower is so scared that he tries to find a way to pay off his debt. It's a psychological trick called fantasy bias effect. The boss didn't use violence against the borrower. On the contrary, he kicked and punched his little brother. So he creates fantasies and prejudice. In fact, although the little brother was beaten to death, but he gets a few cents of interest every time, and he gets the benefit of the doubt. This technique can also be used in the workplace. When a young subordinate makes a mistake, the leader can condemn his predecessor in front of him, and condemn his predecessor for leading him. This way of scolding is often more effective than directly educating a young subordinate to his face. Teaching a young subordinate is more effective, in addition to feeling guilty, and is more likely to be cowed by your authority. This approach may seem drastic, but it's a weapon that leaders must learn. 4. If others can do it, you can do it. Peer pressure. Have you ever thought about it? Have you ever wondered why gangsters are willing to do what the boss tells them to do, even at the risk of their own lives? Why gangsters are willing to follow the orders of their bosses even if they have to lose their lives? It's because of peer pressure. People are easily influenced by their peers and their environment. They change their attitudes, values, and behaviors. Gangsters are scared, but in order not to be ostracized, they'll do what they have to do to avoid being ostracized. It's the same in business. Sometimes leaders have to force their subordinates to do their jobs. They have to force their subordinates to achieve some unreasonable goals. When this happens, they can only use peer pressure. For example, if the team usually signs only 6 to 7 contracts, if you want your subordinate to sign 10 contracts, you can say something like this. In other departments, last month, 6 people in other departments got 20 contracts last month. I'd like you to get to 15. But it's not easy to do. So I want you to get at least 10. That doesn't sound too hard, does it? It's a way to show that other people have done it. It's a way of eliciting sympathy from the other side. The other point is to set a higher goal, and then lowering it back down to the original preset number. Mastering these 2 points, the subordinate feels peer pressure, but they also recognize that the leader is making concessions. Utilizing peer pressure techniques can help a person grow quickly, but too much of it is also easy to overwhelm a subordinate. 5. Close the gap quickly. The Windsor Effect. It's a Yakuza world. There's a lot of turnover in the organization. Sometimes they are arrested and imprisoned. Sometimes they die in a fight. However, every time a new member is added, Mob bosses make sure to do a background check on them to make sure the new faces are not undercover cops, or a rival organization, or a spy sent by a rival organization to spy on them. Bosses usually don't look at themselves. He gathers information from the people around him. He recognizes his client's background. This is the psychological technique of the Windsor Effect. A message or rumor from a third party. It's more powerful than the words of the person themselves. This effect can also be used at work. For example, if you want to get closer to your coworkers, you could intentionally praise the person in question to a third party. When this compliment is transferred to your colleagues' ears, you'll definitely get a good feeling about you. Use the Windsor Effect. It's much more powerful than an in-person compliment. Okay, that's the dark psychology of this episode. Take control. Today's episode is full of practical psychology tips for the workplace. In the workplace today, let's take control to improve our relationships. The content and psychological techniques in this episode are also very easy to understand. Ideal for new managers in the workplace. Use these techniques to lead your team. Finally, what are some of the practical psychological tips that you can use in the workplace? Do you have any useful psychological tips? Feel free to leave a comment below to discuss. Okay, I'll see you in the next video. If you like this video, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Thank you. Bye-bye.